Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the infrastructure panel for Define Tomorrow 2020. I'm joined today by some great panelists, people that I've known in the community for a very long time, people I like to call my friends, to talk about everything to do with infrastructure today, probably a focus towards virtualization and cloud rather than the other bits, but we'll see where we go. I'd like to welcome my panel. We've got Mike Orth from Dell EMC, who is a solutions architect. Kev Johnson from Runecast, who is systems engineer, Ben Evans from Computer World, who is our pre-sales manager, and Paul Wynne, who is also from Dell EMC and a solution architect. Welcome all. Thank you ever so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So should we do a bit of around the room? We'll start with Mark. We will start with Mike. What technology have you been focused on most recently, and what has been your weirdest or top purchase of lockdown 2020?
Okay, very good. Thanks for inviting me on this. I'm covering off the appliance for VMware, our VxRail product. So I do a lot of the software-defined data center, VMware Cloud Foundation on VxRail stuff. And my top purchase has to be, and it's not in frame, but bird boxes. So we went into lockdown, start of spring or whatever. I went and we started feeding the birds in the garden, which I never knew they were there. Obviously, I was at work and I never saw them. So we started feeding them, and then it just became this obsession. I think we have 20 now stuck to the outside of the windows, and they just come up to the feeders and bird houses and junk like that. Not technical.
Allowed you to open your eyes and see something you wouldn't normally see. Absolutely fantastic. Kev, how about yourself? What are you mainly focused on at the moment, and what was your top or weirdest lockdown purchase?
Yeah, so in terms of what I've been focused on, so obviously I'm now working for Runecast, so I'm completely away from all the hardware side of things, which is, as someone who spent a long time as like an infrastructure consultant, it feels weird to not be able to go out and touch storage and networking and things like that. But at the Runecast, I'm kind of focused on all of the stuff that we do in terms of helping customers make sure their environments are configured well, in terms of making sure that they're helping them out with things like security compliance, all of those kind of things. So I'm having to learn a lot of stuff all of the time. Recently, it's been all kind of Kubernetes, and vCloud Director actually is the current thing that I'm trying to get my head around. And again, not something that I've touched in ever. So yeah, just every month or so, I just have to pick up something completely new, and it's brilliant because that's why I'm in this industry, right? In terms of the weirdest, it's not really weirdest, but lockdown for me has basically meant instead of having just a terrible webcam in my MacBook, I've had to go out and basically I've done a lot of webinars, so it's kind of like, okay, right, well, we've got key lights and we've got a proper camera and proper microphones. So I now basically have a home recording studio. I was going to put the green screen up as well, but this room isn't really big enough for the green screen. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been. We have been working on the birds as well, though, so it's nice to kind of see other people doing stuff with nature as well.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Kev. And Ben, over to you.
Thanks, Barry. So I've been doing lots of things this year, but most recently, probably the biggest thing I've been involved in the most is Azure. So looking at public cloud, finally making the decision on which one I'm going to back, because realistically, I've been sat on the fence for far too long. Is it AWS? Is it Azure? Flitting between one or the other. And at the start of the year, it's like, right, I'm just going to focus on Azure. It works well for a lot of customers that I speak to on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, I've started off doing like the entry-level certifications and working my way up through that, and just spending a lot of time building labs and ripping them down and just understanding how it can work from me being an infrastructure guy, so someone who's used to virtual machines and networking and backup and DR and all of the typical pieces I use. How does that translate into public cloud and especially Azure? So yeah, it's been fun. Kept me busy for quite many nights really in the lab, burning the candle at both ends. My top purchase, it's got to be a barbecue. It has to be a barbecue, I think, for this year. Certainly, if I think back to when lockdown started earlier in the year, I bought, on your advice, it was Barry, a Weber barbecue back early April, and I think I used it pretty much every weekend for about 12 weekends on the trot, really until like the kids are like, "Daddy, what's for tea?" I'm like, "Burgers and sausages," and I'm like, "No, not again." But yeah, loved it. It was great. It's not being used so much now, what with the typical British weather, but it's there for when I need to use it. So yeah, brilliant purchase.
Come on, Ben, ideal time to use it. Get out there, get wet, and cook yourself a nice
Barbecue in the garage.
Get a rain cover.
Definitely, yeah.
Probably. Yeah, that's all you need.
Just need a gazebo or something to put over it. Make sure no poison stuff.
I think there are some pictures of me barbecuing under an umbrella somewhere on the internet. Paul, over to you. So what have you been focused on, and what's your top or weirdest purchase of lockdown?
Yeah, so it's been an interesting year. After a number of years building up, a lot of HCI knowledge, and spending all my time on vSAN, collecting a lot of T-shirts around HCI. I've been dragged right out of that and sucked back into block storage. So for the better part of the year, that's what I've been working at. But I've actually been pulled really out of my comfort zone as well, because I know infrastructure, I'm kind of happy in that space, but conversations are developing and starting to look at things like automation, orchestration now. So it's keeping me busy, keeping me on my toes. My purchase or interesting things I've been working on. So I have a big garage. At the back of my garage, I had this cool room, and I decided, right, I'm going to convert this thing into a home bar. So literally myself, my 6-year-old daughter have been working every day, planning and building our home bar. So just this week, I got my little retro tin bullseye sign with Bully on it. So anybody who's old enough to remember Bullseye, I've got that up now beside my dartboard. So, and I don't know if this is yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but my 6-year-old is actually very addicted now to going to the pub and throwing darts. So it's I don't know if her mother is going to be too happy with me.
Can't see anything wrong with that plan.
I think I've hopefully hit my midlife crisis early. I decided to get rid of my relatively new Audi and get a 15-year-old Nissan. So I'm loving it, but equally worried that something's going to break off of it, or I'm going to find some rust in it or something like that. But yeah, the things lockdown have allowed us to do, kind of look at the world a little bit differently. And yeah, I've also taken up woodwork. So again, probably something I didn't think I was going to start doing until I was about 60. But hey, might as well get on with it now. So we'll open up the first question then. And when I was thinking about the questions for what we've entitled the infrastructure panel, I thought we should start by defining what infrastructure actually is and what it means to you guys. Because I think us that are representing specific technologies, maybe we think about infrastructure as one thing, but those that are tuning in that are representing end users may think of infrastructure as something else. So who wants to go first? Who wants to try and define what infrastructure means to you?
Yeah, go on then. I'll jump in here. So for me, infrastructure is the stuff that holds it all together. You don't really need to know all about the plumbing and everything, but actually plumbing is probably a really good analogy. It kind of connects all of the stuff together, and without it, everything kind of falls to pieces. And that's kind of how I explain it to my parents, who basically just think that I work on Facebook. But yeah, that's you work in IT, therefore Facebook. But yeah, infrastructure for me is plumbing.
So you're just Mario, basically.
I'm going to have to work on the Tash, but yeah, okay, yeah, I'll take that one.
Has anyone got any other inputs onto that? I think it's very different for every customer that we meet. What their strategy is for their infrastructure, whether they're going to use public cloud or not. I don't want to go into the old cliches, but I reached out to one of the lads in the customer solution center who works in the OEM and the IoT space this morning, just to say, look, if somebody was to throw this question at you, how would you answer it? And it was interesting. He works with a lot of our customers, and the solution isn't always on something that we have. So we partner with a lot of partners to put their solutions or software on top of this. So Pat O'Duffy, for example, shout out to you from the labs around that. Really interesting.
Yeah, from my side,
I think, look, Barry, I go back.
Oh, do you want to go, Paul, and I'll go after you? I don't mind.
Go on. Mike is after busting in ahead of me already, so it's I think I take a much simpler view of this, and I think it's something that everybody relates to. Is like, we make an assumption that infrastructure is, all of this cool stuff we're playing with, right? It's physical infrastructure, it's virtual infrastructure, it's everything that we can put in a public cloud. But if you're that end customer, that guy that's tuning in today, listening to this session, infrastructure to you could be very, very simply all about the tin. And it's kind of interesting, the evolutions of that as well. Like, I worked for Magners, the cider company, which would be Bulmers in Ireland, and we had a policy of, we had a server room with 70 servers in there. So 70 servers, 70 applications, no shared storage. Everything got backed up to tapes. An insane way to run a business. And, I thought I'd left those days behind me. But, just recently, I was pulled into this conversation with a customer. An account team asked me to speak to them. Said, okay, we're selling this hybrid cloud solution to them. But, I said, fine, that's great. Let's go talk to him. Spoke to that guy, and what I figured out was he was actually still back, in that kind of 2009 headspace. He was maybe a little bit ahead. He had virtualization, he had no vCenter, he had shared nothing. He had 23 physical servers with all of his virtual machines, applications running on top of them, and he's kind of the guy that every time I want to level set, I think of, what does that, the journey, what does infrastructure mean to him, and what can it mean to him as he moves through his, evolving his business?
Definitely very personal journey. Ben, what's your thoughts?
I was going to say, so the guys have pretty much covered most of it, but from sort of one thing I like to think of is the stuff users and consumers don't really think about until it breaks. Usually, it's just an assumption that I'm going to click on my application or my data's there for me to use. And we just take for granted all the infrastructure that underpins that and provides us with that service. And it's a bit similar to sort of houses, really. I mean, they're building some new houses down my way, and the roads are dug up, and all the mains, the electricity, the water, everything's going in, stuff you don't really think about. So you turn on the tap and you expect water to come out. It's like people open their laptops and they expect things to work, but when it breaks, when we have a power cut, everything goes up in arms. It's like, oh, this is down, that's down. So it's pretty. It's taken for granted quite a lot, I think, and people do underestimate, not through fault of their own, how complicated it can be or how much work is involved to keep that running. So yeah, that's kind of my sort of view on it.
I like that, Ben, and certainly that utility analogy I think is very relevant. It's all kind of about abstraction. Which bits do we need to worry about, and the different solutions abstract the outcomes in different ways that allow you to, depending on what your job is, depending on the bits that you're giving to someone else to be responsible for, you're able to abstract that in different ways. So kind of bridges us nicely onto what are the infrastructure trends that we're seeing at the moment. And I think it's really important that we reflect on what we're seeing, because I think if you've been on the conference circuit this year, you've been to VMworld, you've been to Microsoft Ignite, what we hear from the vendors and likewise from Mothership Dell, they're very much setting trends that are going to be happening in some point in the future, or quite likely to be happening some point in the future. But realistically, quite often we see these trends not being adopted for a number of years. They take a while to come through the kind of sausage machine and out the other side, if it were. So, Mike, pose the question to you first. What do you see happening today? What are the trends that customers are speaking to you about?
Yeah, I find it hard to believe, to your point. I'm working in the area I'm working on since 2014. Is it that long that HCI was born? I can't really believe that, and the products I support have changed a good bit. I didn't start off in the space kind of where I'm at, but here's where I am, and I am still meeting customers, like you say, that haven't jumped on that train, that it's the first time they're looking at this way of doing infrastructure, for example. So to me, simply put, we need to be as good as what the public cloud providers are doing for customers. They're taking that responsibility, that risk, how to plumb it all together. They're taking that and making it invisible, and somebody else, handling it for them. The products that we sell just need to be more smart, more easy to use, more automated in many ways, and that's the trend I'm seeing.
Definitely. So Paul, you mentioned automation. Do you see more people turning to automation? Is infrastructure of code becoming a real thing? What use cases do you see for that automation?
Yeah, it's definitely trending up the way, but I'd make the argument that the technology is actually evolving much faster than the people who are running it. We have all of these, every presentation, Kevin's got a presentation, Mike has got a deck that has all of these really cool features in it that we get excited about, but they don't necessarily, kind of get that, or they're not ready for it. They're going, okay, that's great, but tell me about the box. The automation one is really interesting. I think, you look at, I suppose, Mike and I were talking before this event about what kind of topics, and we were trying to categorize people. So if you take personas and maybe take the most advanced, take the least advanced guy, and the most advanced guy is using the turnkey solutions, the converged solutions. Everything is fully automated, lots of intelligence, machine learning built in. But the other guy that's kind of that's starting out on that journey is looking at how can I do this as cheap as possible and as easy as possible, because we don't have time to go and we're at home now, we have families, we don't have that time to go and study or go away for a week, attend an event. So what tools are there that can make life easy for us? The one that's gotten my interest the most this year has been Ansible. I think it's a really, really cool capability. It's not the most difficult to learn. Put my fingers up and say that, but it's definitely one that I see as being really valuable and that people can actually pick up and run with straight away.
Fantastic. So Ben, what do you see with our customers? What are people turning to today? You mentioned that obviously you're looking at Azure at the moment.
Yeah, that's right, and partly that's kind of been the reason why I'm looking at. It's been driven by a customer asking about cloud and how I can adopt the cloud. I've been to more meetings in engagements that I can count where customers are like, I want to be cloud first, or I want to move everything to the cloud, or I'm never buying any infrastructure. And I quite enjoy just unpicking those conversations and just exploring a little bit more about, okay, what are the drivers behind this? What are you doing from a business perspective? Is the business involved? Because IT is so ingrained to a lot of organizations now, you need to have that support and backing to be able to do some of these larger projects like cloud migrations and things like that. For some people, they think cloud is a location. Other people think cloud is an operating model. So it's just about unpicking what they actually mean by I want to move to the cloud. What is it they want to do? And then just help them on that journey, sort of unpick the easier projects or the projects to start with, because some customers just get a little bit blinkered by all the marketing words and the buzzwords that go around, and like the other guys have said, it's so fast paced these days. It's like, oh, I need to look at that, and by the time you get around to looking at that thing's now no longer talked about anymore, and something else has come along, and it's a little bit mind blowing sometimes for sort of people whose day jobs are to keep the lights on, to keep the business going, and things like that, because that's their job. And it's for us, here as vendors and partners, to support them with those sort of extra journeys and help them understand it at a more operational level, what it means to them, to help them with that journey.
Definitely. So Kev, what do you see? And obviously, previously you've been at VMware, you're at Roomcast now. Are you seeing that migration to the cloud? What you see?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd just like to come back to a couple of things Paul said. Firstly, the people want something that's cheap and easy, and rarely are the two available at the same time. So you can either have cheap and often it's badly documented, or you've got to spend a lot of time to get it up and running, or it's easy, in which case you're looking at things like these turnkey solutions. And I think that's where a lot of the value in HCI and converged infrastructure and a lot of the stuff that's going on in the cloud is. And the other thing I wanted to just kind of address was the automation discussion. And this is a conversation I'm having a lot with customers, where they're kind of like, okay, we need to automate loads of stuff because all of a sudden, because of COVID, we've had to furlough half of our IT department. So now we're running on fumes basically. And automation is obviously a really great way to help those resources that you have go further. But you need to understand what you're automating, because if you take a bad process and you automate it, you just make things a million times worse, a million times faster. And it's really important that there are tools out there like things like Ansible, where the on-ramp is actually, it's not the steepest on-ramp. You can pick that technology up fairly quickly, and you can get fairly, you can get pretty complex in terms of how you're managing your infrastructure there with Ansible. But yeah, so it's important to kind of have an idea as to what's going on, what you're looking to achieve with these technologies, rather than just I need to get my cloud badge today. And I say this as someone who's chased a lot of cloud certs. So yeah, that's kind of important. But in terms of what we're seeing, as I say, yeah, customers looking to do automation. Customers are looking at things like, this journey to the cloud. What does this mean to me? And how do I make sure that I'm, when I've got all my infrastructure running in a data center, that I can go and touch those servers. It's really easy to be satisfied that they're secure, because nobody can get into that building. You've got firewalls and all of these kind of things. Once you start moving those workloads into the cloud, you've got to really, really think properly about what's going on, rather than just chuck all your work. Don't just do a lift and shift, basically. I guess that's what I'm coming down to. But yeah, securing all of these things, you still have to worry about the same problems that you have on premises, but you maybe just have less control. You don't have access to, you can't manage physical access. There's all kinds of other problems that you need to deal with. So yeah, that's pretty much where my conversations with customers are spending a lot of time going at the moment.
Definitely. I think it's Simon Sinek that's got the book Always Start With Why. And I think that is really important. The answer isn't whichever trend I've got to do this, it's why are you doing this? What outcome are you wanting to achieve? And Mike, to go back to one of the points that you made, you spoke around those IoT use cases and things like that. If you believe a lot of the discussion at the moment, the new trend that we're seeing is workloads are now coming out of the cloud and going to the edge. We've got this new edge type of workload. Adele, are you seeing in the solution centers people talking about edge workloads?
Yeah, I don't hear customers using the term edge so much, but certainly the marketing talks about it. And, I don't really get too hung up in that piece of it, but certainly a lot of the customers are that I talk to are not either going cloud first, or some of the larger customers at some point leadership had that strategy of cloud first and it didn't really work out, or cloud changed and the focus of what was being offered changed, and that being able to not be, I don't want to use the word lock in, but only in one cloud became difficult for some customers. So they needed to be able to go from one to another. So yeah, wherever the edge is, whether it's where the data is being generated, whether it is a data center or not, we are certainly hearing that from a lot of customers. Just help us run our business easier, and whatever that might be, and we try and advise in that area. So
it's all about those use cases, really, isn't it? It's, yeah. I think, Ben, you touched upon it. It's stop thinking about, well, actually, the trend is we've got to be in the cloud. It's to Kev's point, is why. What are you trying to achieve here? What is the need? And then let's architect it correctly, rather than making the decision about how you're going to do it first, before then you're asking the questions around that why element. And I think there are other trends that we're seeing at the moment. And one of the things that I think organizations need to do is they need to question why they are doing something in a certain way. And I think one of those examples is where there is some form of in-house development, or you're creating a product, we are seeing a change of tact into the way that those applications are built. Containers are undoubtedly a thing now. Kubernetes is probably the biggest marketing term there has ever been, although it is a very good offering and open source and delivered in a number of ways. But believe a lot of the presentations you read at the moment, and you're not cool unless you're doing something with Kubernetes. So, Kev, as you use the word Kubernetes in your opening,
we all get to drink now.
Pitch, you get to drink. Yeah. So we know Kubernetes has a use case, but what are we seeing in real life? Who is deploying it? Where are the use cases? And does your average Joe IT manager need to be getting up to speed?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that I'm certainly seeing in conversations with our customers is, people are interested in Kubernetes because they've been thinking about containerizing for a while, but it's just been a case of, how do we do it? We've got some developers, and these developers are building these things, but we don't really know how to control them. And Kubernetes seems to be where the industry has kind of decided, okay, this is what we're going to standardize on in terms of managing our, scheduling and managing our workloads wherever they're going to be. And there's also the whole multi-cloud thing, so you've got this whole, okay, well, we can deploy it on premises, and with that same YAML file, that same image, we can deploy it onto Azure and onto AWS, onto GCP and Alibaba Cloud, and any whichever cloud of choice you want to use. So multi-cloud is a really, really big buzzword at the moment as well, on top of Kubernetes, and they kind of go really well together. But the biggest problem, or the biggest stumbling block I'm seeing with a lot of organizations is they've got an IT department and they've got traditional infrastructure skills, the kind of skills that I've been working over the last 15 years with, and containers just require a different mindset, in the same way that cloud requires a different mindset. And that's kind of the stumbling block. It's kind of like, okay, well, our staff need to get up to speed. How do we bridge that gap? Do we get some consultants in? Is there some tooling that we can use to kind of help make sure that we're doing things correctly? Do I need to watch some videos? Kubernetes is the fun aspect of Kubernetes is how easy it is to get up and running. You just deploy Minikube to your laptop and you're done. But then if you want to do it if you want to productionize that, all of a sudden you've got to worry about compliance and security and all the other kinds of stuff that you would do with your traditional infrastructure. You've still got to do that with Kubernetes. It's just achieved in different ways, and that's a big challenge that I'm seeing at the moment.
Definitely. Paul, what are you seeing from the Solution Center side of things?
Yeah, so I think if you take back the two topics that both Mike and Kevin have spoken about, Mike was talking about edge use cases, Kevin was talking about Kubernetes. You put the two of those together, and that's something that's coming up a lot in conversation for me. So as an example, a lot of Kubernetes development at the core within the centers, but then pushing applications, pushing services to the edge, where you can provide, if you use some of let's plug Dell for a minute. PowerStore is one of the new storage platforms they've put out there. There's an X version of that, which is got some virtualization built in, so hypervisor on the controllers, but that's got plugins for containers also. So you've got the ability to develop on HCI in the core, developing on block storage, push your applications out to the edge to do their work there. And if you look at two sectors, you can do that in two. One retail. So, we all push they've got stores all over the country. They're not going to take automation and deliver that, from a central location. They want to do all of the systems and processing at the edge, and then later on, as a post-process operation, get information back into their core data centers where they protect, replicate, archive what they want to do, or push it off to their clouds. So that's the kind of use case I'm seeing for Kubernetes right now. But I do think it's still quite young, and there's some limitations around it.
Definitely. I think that's really interesting. I think lockdown and COVID has also put some changes into people's operational model. And certainly I've seen some of our customers that develop in-house that they've seen very unusual spikes with the type of activity that is maybe running on their platforms, and that kind of ability to be able to kind of peak out to an external platform, but then bring it back in-house with those in-house development platforms is certainly something that is very important to them. So to kind of segue a bit now, and we've spoken about cloud being a thing, looking at the why, having this multi-cloud solution where that makes sense. It kind of brings us back to the virtual infrastructure, that if we are going to have a virtual infrastructure on premises, or maybe we're looking at something like a VMware-led cloud service, vSphere 7 is relatively new, I believe 7.1 has recently been released or will be released soon. Ben, what are you seeing with vSphere 7? Why should customers be considering to upgrade at the moment?
How long have we got? Is probably the question. I'm joking on this as an hour webinar. We could easily spend an hour talking about all the goodness in vSphere 7 and update 1. But for me, there's three sort of key features that sort of jumped out when I started playing around with vSphere 7 earlier this year. So the first thing for me is the lifecycle management aspect of it. So that is helping customers not only upgrade the version of the code base on their hardware, it also looks at the firmware and the drivers versions and the compatibility aspect of hosts as well. I've lost count of the number of customers I've spoken to. Yeah, we just use VRM and we just update our ESXi host. It's like, well, when did you last touch the firmware on there? We don't bother with that. It's like, is it stable? Do you get any purple screens of death? Yeah, but if you've got any customer, and that sort of attitude these days isn't really acceptable in my mind. There's so many tools we can use out there just to help not get into that problem. We'd like to switch off at weekends. We don't need to be spending out of hours fixing and patching hosts. So we can do that now with Lifecycle Manager. So it bundles in both all the hardware and the firmware updates. And Dell have done a really good job with their OpenManage integration with that to help with that lifecycle management of the whole piece. The second is vMotion for me. So vMotion is one of those cool technologies that everyone loved when it first came out. The problem has been, as VMs have got bigger and sort of like the memory footprints and the workloads on those VMs have become more demanding, it's been an issue then trying to vMotion that VM to another host when you want to do maintenance or for an issue or things like that. So a lot of larger customers out there would put rules in not to vMotion that host, that VM, leave it on that host, leave it running, don't touch it. But there's been some good enhancements in 7 in the code base that do away with those problems. So the issue of vMotioning of a large virtual machine from one host to another is gone away now. And the third is yet another enterprise feature is DRS. So it's always been there. It's always sort of run in the background. People just usually take it for granted. But they've made some improvements around how frequently it runs now. It also uses other metrics like CPU ready time and memory swap to make a better informed decision of where to move those workloads. So those are the three sort of cool features for me and why you should upgrade to vSphere 7, just to take advantage of those three. And there's a ton of other stuff. Kevin and I done a webinar on vSphere 7. I'm sure we can put the link somewhere, but check it out. We go into far more detail on that. Shameless plug.
Fantastic. So Kev, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the shameless plug there. So for me, I mean, Lifecycle Manager, as far as I'm concerned, in my time at VMware, that was kind of my baby. So it's great to hear people talking really positive really positive messages about that, and I think it's an absolute game changer. There were a couple of other areas that I think there's been some really big improvements. The first one is a pretty small one, and it came with vSphere 7 update 1, and it's the clustering service. So this is we're now looking at the decoupling of things like DRS from vCenter itself. So vCenter itself is obviously this big monolithic stack of things, and it's a bit of a single point of failure. And so I've been hoping for a long time to see some of these services decoupled from vCenter, so that you don't have this big problem when vCenter's down if you're patching vCenter, for example. So DRS can then still run even if vCenter's not available. And the other thing that I think is really big, and well, it's probably not as big right now as I think it is going to be in the future, is identity federation. So identity federation is all about allowing you to log into vCenter using a third-party identity provider. So with vSphere 7, the launch, what you got there was this capability to use Orth to log in using ADFS. And I believe the plan is down the line we're going to see integrations with VMware's own identity manager solution, so anything that can consume as well. But the other thing that this really helps with is things like multi-factor authentication. So people wanting to really secure their logins for vCenter, they're wanting to use two-factor authentication, things like that. But unfortunately, up until recently, pretty much your only options were smart cards or RSA Secure ID. And I've never really been a big fan of Secure ID, but there's things like Okta and Ping and all kinds of other providers out there And so with Identity Federation, what we're going to see going forward is this capability to just point vCenter at your identity provider. It doesn't matter what provider that is. And then the problem of, are they providing multi-factor authentication? Are they providing all of the different features that we need? That problem is then moved away from vCenter and towards the identity provider. And that kind of that really helps when you're dealing with scoping for audits and things like that as well. So I think in future, maybe in an update 2 or something like that, we're going to see Identity Federation is going to be massive.
It's becoming a growing challenge, certainly as we adopt more services and even from a user perspective, from a software as a service perspective. So we'll move on to a bit of a quick fire round now. Let's get some short, sharp answers to the questions that will go round. So Mike, you first. What recommendations have you got to your to virtualization admins out there that they should be doing to keep their infrastructure running at its best, making the most out of that infrastructure?
Yeah, I thought about this a bit, and I would say stay on a supported path. How's that? Keep it kind of general, but there are, no matter which virtualization solution you go with necessarily, there's going to be specific architecture designs that are approved or validated, right? You know where I'm going with this. If you stick along that path, you're not going to architect yourself or paint yourself into a corner that you can't get out of. The infrastructure is going to massively change over the next year. Smart NICs are going to be coming. We're going to have multiple CPUs from different vendors running inside of our infrastructure. We're going to have multiple hypervisors running inside of our infrastructure on these different devices. It's going to get really, really, really interesting, offloading of different services. So if you want to keep yourself open to be able to consume those new technologies, then you need to stay on a path that allows you to get there, or you're going greenfield, you're starting something new. You don't necessarily have to go all the way to turnkey. I'm a big believer in turnkey. It makes my life easier in my own day job, supporting labs for proof of concepts for customers. But I think there's a nice balance in the products we offer where you can decide whether you want to follow that design path yourself or have somebody worry about it all for you and go turnkey.
Definitely. I don't think I could get away without asking Kev this question. So what's your recommendation? How do people keep their virtual infrastructures running tip-top?
Yeah, so I'll probably echo what Mike said. If you try to keep yourself at, reasonably within, not necessarily the bleeding edge, but try not to let yourself drift and kind of get to that point where you're still running vSphere 6.0, still running vSphere 5.5, and then you've got a big problem because you need to get to 7.0 and there's no easy path there. Just kind of try to keep up with the release cadence as to what's going on. And 6.5 is still supported. You're absolutely fine there. But in terms of tooling, yeah, I mean, obviously I'm gonna plug Runecast Analyzer, but there are tools out there. There are many tools out there that will help you with these things. I happen to think Runecast Analyzer is the best because they pay for this roof over my head and all the rest of that stuff. But in terms of making sure that you're removing those risks from your environment, all these kind of latent risks that might not have been known about when you deployed your infrastructure 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 25 years ago. New stuff comes to light all the time. And the final thing I would say is please deploy your security patches. That's the last one.
Definitely. So slight change on the question now as we come over to you, Paul. What is your number one tip that made your life easier as a VI admin when you've had that responsibility?
Ooh, wow. It's kind of ties back to the previous question. It's don't try and do it all on your own. Partner up. Leverage the experience of the Runecasts, the Dells, the VMwares, the computer worlds. These organizations have lots of people who specialize in lots of different areas, and that just takes the pressure off of you trying to become an expert in absolutely everything. And that's something that I did. I took a company that had an SBS 2003 box with everything running on it, including GPS servers that was taking telemetry information back from mobile devices on a single server. Took that to a two-center data center setup with virtualization, nice hub and spoke solution. solution. I couldn't do that all on my own at the time. So I partnered up with a company, and we did it together. And it's mutually beneficial. I learn from them. They build, a robust solution for me that adheres to all of the nice best practices that are going to make my life easier in the future.
Definitely. Same question to you, Ben.
This is going to be really, really boring, but I'm a massive fan of documentation. So whenever I've done stuff in the past, I've looked after infrastructure and estates. Maybe it's the way my brain works. I don't know. It's like a first in, first out queue. I do something and it works, and then I forget about it. So that's why documentation is really, really key for me. And even when I'm like tinkering in my lab and things like that, it's like I try to document things where I can, because I just forget I do them or forget how I've done it. And it could be something, something very simple that I've done 50 times before, but sometimes I'm like, what? How did I do that? And I think it was you, Barry, that said just like that. Sometimes you Google stuff and then your blog post comes back. And it's like those sort of little things sort of help you sort of think, so I'm right in doing this. But yeah, documentation for me is king.
Have you Googled yourself yet?
No.
And found your own solution published somewhere on a blog or something? No.
No, I'm worried about it. Come up like that.
That's why I started the blog.
What you need to remember, Ben, is that when Barry Googles something, the prefix is Barry Coombs, trouble with, so that he gets his own blog post back all the time.
Definitely. As we kind of move towards wrapping this up, what would your recommendation be to an IT manager, architect, mid-size organization, kind of average virtual environment, nothing kind of out of the usual, that they should be including in their strategy for infrastructure for 2021? So what's your one recommendation for your 2021 infrastructure strategy? Mike, we'll start with you.
One recommendation. Well, I think look for infrastructure when you're in that decision base between maybe cloud or infrastructure. Look for what a company's roadmap is, what their plan is. How are they going to support this particular product in the future? Are you looking at something that's been around a long time and maybe it's come to its end? Are you looking at something that has a bright future and will roll with the changes, because all these hardware and infrastructure changes I'm talking about is going to hit every vendor out there, including the cloud vendors? What's their answer to it? Quite often we're comparing our solutions to cloud all the time. And just keep an eye on that, because all of that has a matter. Whether you're investing in something that requires, in order to expand, acquisition, that's happening as well, or whether they already have, the bones of a solution in-house that they can then, if they've abstracted enough in software and automation, they can move to that next level quite quickly. That's really what you care about. How quickly can that solution take on new features, new capability, new performance for your existing investment? That's what we're moving towards.
Brilliant, thank you. Paul, what's your recommendation for 2021 infrastructure strategy?
Security. Nice and simple. Even at this point, even my butcher is online because of the new world we're living in. We have to change the way we operate our business. Okay, so instead of going to the butcher shop, I'm ordering my food online and it gets delivered to me. So I need to be able to secure everything that I put out in the public space, and especially if I'm in the business of generating intellectual property. That's, more than ever, I need to protect that. So security for 21 and 22.
Definitely. We've seen lots of changes and challenges with security that have risen over the lockdown period, and lots of sticky plasters that have been placed over problems to get things working in the way that we're working now. So it's time to make those fixes real. Ben, what's your infrastructure strategy recommendation for 21?
It's kind of building on a little bit what Mike said, really, but speak with the business and make sure the strategy that you've got aligns with actually where the business is going and what they're doing. Simple things like I've done infrastructure refreshes for customers, and then 3 months later they're calling us back because they're moving buildings or something like that. And it's like you can tell that the two weren't kind of joined up at the time. The IT department was off doing their own thing, I've got my infrastructure refresh to do. That's my baby. But then the business is like, yeah, we're actually moving premises, and tying the two together would have made everyone's life a lot easier at that time. So just speaking with the business, get their input. I don't think the two are separate anymore. I think the business strategy is basically almost the IT strategy as well.
Definitely. No, gone is the time that we can just buy technologies to tick them off on our CVs. That was good time back then, but very much need to be led by the business now. Kev, same question for you.
Yeah, just kind of extending on what Ben was saying, really. Figure out what your business requirements are. Everything, all of the technology is there to serve business requirements, and to just kind of simplify that even further. Figure out where it is that you're trying to get to. What's the end goal, and work back from there. Don't work out what your next step is before you figure out where you're going to. You need to have that vision at the end of the day. As to where you're going to, and then you just kind of plot your route backwards from that to where you are now, and then it should, it's easy as pie once you get there. But yeah, everything needs to be business needs focused.
Definitely, I think that this kind of acceptance of the strategy as cloud. What was the question again? Is something that we need to be questioning. That doesn't mean that a large number of time we're going to end up moving workloads out to the cloud. That could still mean very true, but we need to kind of stop with knowing what the answer is prior to then deploying that. So as we wrap up now, if we can just go around the room, let people know where they can find you. The virtualization community is very important and very dear to us all. So where can we find you on Twitter? Do you have a blog? And what is the one community resource that you rely on? So Mike, over to you.
Oh, only one resource? Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at HCI Diver. I do have a blog at the same URL, so spend a bit of time there. And the one resource, I suppose, I love podcasts. I won't mention Paul's T-shirt because you probably want to plug that, but I do listen to that one. I think at the moment, I'll take it from a pre-sales point of view. For my role, I'm trying to always be better at being able to communicate and help customers, partners, and salespeople. So I follow We the Sales Engineers podcast. They are prolific in producing content, and they bring on a lot of guest speakers. And really, I've picked up a lot of tips on how best to speak to customers, do presentations, demos, things like that over the time. Ramsey, I can't remember his last name, but Ramsey is the fella. He has a Twitter handle as well. Great little resource.
Fantastic. I have to check that one out. I've not looked at that one myself. Ben, same question to you.
So yeah, I'm on Twitter at the VCave. I also run my own blog site, same URL at thevcave.com. One resource is really difficult to answer because same with everyone. I use a sort of multitude of things, but user groups have been quite popular for me at the moment, especially in the current situation with COVID. A lot of these user groups have switched to an online format, which is really good because you can join them from the comfort of your own home, which means you don't need to travel. I mean, yeah, you miss out on the networking side, which is a really powerful and good thing about user groups, but it just means they're more accessible. So I've been attending a lot of user groups on Azure and WVD, that kind of thing recently. For some reason, most of them seem to be based up north or in Scotland. Can't work out why yet, but that just goes to show, like, if we weren't in the times we are now, I probably wouldn't have even attended those because, yeah, traveling from where I live, traveling up north to Scotland is quite a task. But yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ben. Kev, same question to you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the one person on this this panel that didn't really think properly when they register the domain for their blog. So I'm on Twitter as at Kev_Johnson. You can catch my blog at v-it.pro, and you can catch me on all of the other kind of places apart from Facebook. Facebook is the only place I'm not really on. In terms of resources, so blogs are great, but there's a lot of them to read, and people publish way more stuff than I have time to read. The same with podcasts. Podcasts are awesome, but at the same time, because I don't have a commute anymore, I tend to find that I'm really struggling to find any time to listen to podcasts. So probably the biggest resource I would say is Reddit. it feels weird. I only joined Reddit a couple of years ago, and that seems to be the go-to place for pretty much any ridiculous question you might have about any technology whatsoever. And there's Discords and there's Slacks and all of the rest of it, but Reddit seems to be the place for me.
Fantastic. And I think Paul's been having a few video problems, but we'll give it a go. Paul, give a plug. Where can people find you? Where's your blog?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at VDI All-Star, and I've got a link to my blog on that. But kind of the resources, I'm a Google warrior. I like to look at as many blogs as possible and pick up as much information as possible from different people. So Kevin is a good source of information for me on WhatsApp. I get all my VMware knowledge from him. So.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much to the panel for joining me today. I've been Barry Coombs. You can find me on Twitter at virtualizereal. Of course, go and check out definetomorrow.co.uk, where you'll be able to find lots of information that we will share post this event. You can find our podcast on there as well. Thank you ever so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the Define Tomorrow virtual conference.